I spent 35 years of my life breathing life into premature babies as a neonatal intensive care nurse. But as I lay trapped inside my paralyzed body, I realized I had birthed absolute strangers. My name is Brenda. I am 68 years old and a widow. I always believed a mother's love was the ultimate shield against the cruelty of the world, but I was entirely wrong. I was lying in a hospital bed, swallowed by total darkness, unable to open my eyes or move a single muscle. The doctors told my family I had suffered a catastrophic stroke and was in a deep coma. They said I might never wake up. My children believed them. Thinking I was already as good as gone, the people I sacrificed my entire life for stood right next to my bed and began carving up my life savings like starved vultures. They showed their true greedy colors without a single ounce of shame. But they made one fatal mistake. They assumed my mind was gone too. I heard every single vicious word they said. And as I listened to them divide my home and my money, I prepared a silent counterattack that would strip them of everything and hand my entire legacy to the one secret heir they never saw coming. The air in the sterile room was heavy and suffocating. I could smell the harsh chemical bleach from the floors and the bitter scent of cheap cafeteria coffee nearby. The steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only proof I was still in this world. The stroke had struck me out of nowhere, stealing my voice and my movement and plunging me into a terrifying, unyielding silence. At first, the sheer panic was overwhelming. But then I waited in the heavy darkness behind my closed eyelids for a warm hand to grasp mine. I desperately waited to hear my son and my daughter whisper prayers for my recovery. Instead, the heavy door swung open and a cold reality hit me like a physical blow. Brisk footsteps approached my bed, but there was no gentle, comforting touch. My son Kevin and my daughter Alicia did not come to hold their mother. They came to do math. I felt the air shift as Kevin sighed heavily, complaining loudly and bitterly about the daily cost of keeping me on life support. My heart shattered completely. The children I had worked grueling double shifts to raise were openly annoyed that my mere survival was draining their future inheritance. My husband passed away when my babies were still in elementary school. The day we buried him, the sky over Atlanta was heavy with rain, and my heart was heavier with the terrifying realization that I was entirely on my own. I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I dried my tears, put on my scrubs, and stepped up to be both mother and father to Kevin and Alicia. For over 2 decades, I worked grueling 12-hour double shifts in the neonatal intensive care unit. My feet would swell to twice their size, and my back ached constantly from bending over incubators, but I never complained. I did it all, so my children would never feel the void their father left behind. I wanted them to have every advantage in this world. When it came time for college, I refused to let them start their adult lives drowning in student loan debt. I paid every single tuition bill out of my own pocket. I worked every major holiday every weekend and countless overnight shifts, severely delaying my own retirement just to make sure their futures were secure. Every extra penny I made went straight into paying off the mortgage on our beautiful historic family home in a prestigious Atlanta neighborhood. This house was my absolute sanctuary and my greatest pride. It was a sprawling home with a beautiful wraparound porch and original hardwood floors that held the echoes of my children laughing and running down the halls. I poured my sweat and my fading youth into the foundation of that house. I believed I was building an unbreakable fortress of love that would protect our family for generations to come. I traded my best years to give Kevin and Alicia the perfect foundation, never once suspecting that the very house I broke my back to pay for would become the prize they fought over before my body was even cold. I thought my endless sacrifices were planting strong seeds of gratitude and deep love, but instead, I was unknowingly watering seeds of bitter entitlement. I gave them absolutely everything I had until my cup was completely empty and my bones were tired. I honestly believed I had done a magnificent job raising them. For years, I lived under the comfortable illusion that we were a tight-knit, loving family. Sunday dinners at my house were a sacred tradition. I would spend all weekend cooking their favorite meals, setting the dining room table with my best plates, and listening to them talk about their successful careers. I trusted them completely. My heart swelled with pride every time I looked at them. I thought we shared an unbreakable bond. When Kevin married Chloe, I welcomed her with open arms. Chloe was a white American woman from a wealthy background, and from the very beginning she made sure I knew it. There was always a distinct emotional distance between us, but I did my best to bridge the gap. She would often make subtle, stinging remarks about my home, calling my antique furniture outdated, or suggesting my neighborhood was a little too colorful for her taste. She complained about the seasoning in my food and rolled her eyes at our family traditions. These microaggressions cut me deeply, but I gracefully ignored every single one of them. I smiled and kept my mouth shut for the sake of family peace. I wanted Kevin to be happy. I swallowed my pride time and time again, believing that a mother must sometimes endure disrespect to keep her family unified. I thought my silence was the glue holding us together. I never realized that my constant accommodating only made Chloe view me as weak and disposable. I trusted Alicia to be my confidant, my brilliant daughter who understood my struggles, but she sat silently by while Chloe disrespected our heritage and our home. I looked past all the red flags, because acknowledging them would mean facing the heartbreaking reality that the family I built was completely fractured beneath the surface. That beautiful illusion of a perfect family shattered completely on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in my kitchen watering the ferns by the window when a sudden violent pain shot through the back of my head. It felt as though a bolt of lightning had struck my brain. The gardening pitcher slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered loudly on the hardwood floor, splashing water everywhere. My vision instantly blurred into a terrifying mix of spinning colors and heavy black spots. I tried desperately to call out for help, but my mouth would not cooperate. My tongue felt thick and entirely useless. A frightening numbness rushed down the entire right side of my body, and my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed onto the wet kitchen floor, completely paralyzed by extreme fear and sudden physical weakness. As I lay there struggling to draw a single breath, a profound, crushing sense of vulnerability washed over me. With my medical background, I knew exactly what was happening. I was having a massive, catastrophic stroke. The edges of my vision grew darker by the second, and a freezing cold sweat drenched my clothes. But even in those terrifying final moments of consciousness, before the darkness completely consumed my mind, I desperately clung to one single comforting thought. I told myself with absolute certainty that my children would be there to save me. I imagined my son Kevin rushing through the front door to lift me up, and my daughter Alicia tightly holding my hand in the back of the rushing ambulance. I peacefully let the darkness take me, because I truly believed that the loving family I had sacrificed everything to build would rally around me with devotion and care. I willingly surrendered to the deep sleep, trusting they would catch me when I fell. I never imagined they would be the ones eagerly waiting to push me into the grave. I drifted back to the waking world, slowly floating up from a deep and heavy ocean of total blackness. At first, I felt a profound sense of overwhelming relief wash through my mind. I was alive. I could hear the rhythmic pumping of a ventilator and the steady chiming of a heart monitor somewhere near my head. I thanked God for sparing my life, believing the worst of the storm had passed and that I had survived the stroke. But as my consciousness fully sharpened, a cold and creeping terror began to replace my gratitude. I tried to flutter my eyelids open to see the room, but my eyes refused to obey. The darkness remained absolute. I attempted to twitch my fingers, to wiggle my toes, to take a deep voluntary breath, but my body felt like it was buried under 1,000-pound weights of wet concrete. I was trapped inside a completely useless shell. I realized with mounting horror that my mind was perfectly clear and awake, but my physical form was entirely paralyzed. The medical term locked-in syndrome flashed across my memory from my decades of nursing. I was a prisoner in my own flesh, completely unable to communicate with the outside world. The panic was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to beg for someone to notice that I was awake inside this silent tomb. My heart rate spiked, the monitor beeping faster, but no one came rushing in to check on me. I was left alone in the frightening void, wrestling with the terrifying reality of my paralysis. Just as the crushing weight of despair threatened to break my spirit entirely, the heavy hospital door creaked open. I heard the unmistakable shuffling of familiar footsteps entering the room. I immediately recognized the heavy stride of my son Kevin, and the sharp clicking heels of my daughter Alicia, followed closely by the soft tread of my daughter-in-law Chloe. A massive wave of anticipation and comfort flooded my soul. My family was here. I waited eagerly in the dark, straining to feel the warmth of their hands, and listening closely to hear their voices filled with love and concern, ready to draw strength from their presence. There were no soft whispers of prayer. There were no gentle hands reaching out to stroke my hair or wipe away the imaginary sweat from my brow. Instead, Kevin let out a loud, exasperated sigh that echoed harshly in the sterile room. He immediately started complaining about the astronomical daily cost of the intensive care unit. His voice lacked any trace of sorrow or grief. He sounded like a man annoyed by an unexpected car repair bill, loudly calculating how quickly my medical expenses were eating into his future bank account. He coldly remarked that keeping a vegetable on life support was a completely pointless drain on the estate. The word vegetable struck my heart like a physical blade. My own son, the boy I had carried and nurtured and worked double shifts for, was looking at my motionless body and seeing nothing but a financial burden. Then Chloe chimed in, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. She did not even try to mask her greed now that she thought I could not hear her. She casually announced that she had already spoken to her wealthy real estate developer friends about the house. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she detailed her grand plan to completely bulldoze my beautiful historic home. She laughed lightly, calling my decades of sentimental attachment to the property utterly tacky and pathetic. She talked about tearing down the beautiful wraparound porch where I used to rock my babies to sleep, and ripping up the original hardwood floors to build a sterile block of overpriced luxury condos. Chloe gloated that the land value alone would make them millionaires overnight, totally erasing the sanctuary I had broken my back to pay off. I waited in the absolute darkness for my daughter Alicia to defend me. I waited for her to yell at Chloe and demand respect for the house she grew up in. But Alicia simply agreed. My brilliant daughter coldly stated that the condo deal sounded perfectly fine, as long as she received exactly 60% of my life insurance payout. She argued with Kevin over the percentages, treating my impending death like a corporate negotiation. Her voice was ice cold, devoid of any daughterly affection. Then Alicia casually dropped a detail that made my blood run entirely cold. She told Kevin that as soon as the lawyers declared me officially incapacitated, she was going to immediately evict my elderly disabled sister from the guest house out back. She called her own aunt a useless squatter and said she would have the local sheriff throw her out on the street by the end of the week. They stood right next to my bed, breathing the same air as me, and happily plotted the absolute destruction of everything I loved. They were completely unbothered by the fact that I was lying right there. They assumed my brain was completely dead, so they dropped their fake masks of familial devotion and let their true monstrous greed hang out in the open. I listened to them divide my assets, destroy my home, and casually condemn my helpless sister to homelessness, all while I lay trapped in a paralyzed shell. Their laughter and cold calculations bounced off the hospital walls, mingling with the steady beeping of my heart monitor. Every word they spoke was a shovel of dirt thrown onto my still breathing body. The agony of that moment was completely indescribable. It was 1,000,000 times worse than the stroke itself. My heart actually physically hurt inside my chest, breaking into countless jagged pieces as the horrifying truth washed over me. All those grueling double shifts at the hospital, all the holidays I missed, all the sacrifices I made to pay their college tuitions out of pocket, they all meant absolutely nothing. I had poured my entire life force into raising two selfish, entitled monsters who could not even wait for my heart to stop beating before they started picking the meat from my bones. I wanted to cry an ocean of tears, but my paralyzed body denied me even that small comfort. I was trapped in a dry, dark prison with my unbearable grief. But as I lay there listening to Chloe mock my taste in furniture, and Alicia plan the ruthless eviction of my disabled sister, a profound shift happened deep inside my soul. The crushing sorrow and the agonizing maternal heartbreak began to harden. The intense pain burned away, leaving behind a pure, white-hot fury. It was a cold and calculating anger that I had never felt before in my entire 68 years of life. The unconditional love I held for Kevin and Alicia evaporated into the sterile hospital air. They were no longer my precious children. They were my absolute enemies. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to God right then and there. I resolved that I was absolutely not going to die in this bed. I refused to let my life story end as a tragic victim of their disgusting greed. I would not let Chloe bulldoze my family legacy, and I would certainly not let Alicia throw my vulnerable sister out onto the street. A fierce, powerful fire ignited in my belly, giving me strength I did not know I possessed. I decided I was going to fight my way out of this paralyzed state, whatever it took, just to ensure they never saw a single red cent of my money. 3 agonizing days bled into nights inside that sterile hospital room. I remained completely trapped in my silent physical prison, listening to the suffocating tick of the wall clock and praying for a miracle to deliver me from this nightmare. My mind was razor-sharp and entirely consumed by a burning desire for justice, but my body stubbornly refused to obey my commands. Then, on the 4th night, something miraculous finally shifted. A young night nurse named Sarah was checking my intravenous line. She had a gentle, compassionate spirit and always spoke to me as if I was truly listening, unlike the cold and clinical daytime staff. As she wiped a stray tear from my cheek, I concentrated every single ounce of my willpower into my right hand. The immense effort felt like trying to move a literal mountain, but slowly, miraculously, my index finger twitched against the bedsheets. Sarah gasped quietly and looked down at my hand. I pushed through the exhausting physical barrier and managed to squeeze her warm fingers. Her eyes went wide with absolute shock. She leaned over me and whispered that if I could hear her, I should blink once for yes. I forced my heavy, stiff eyelids open for the first time in days and gave her one deliberate blink. Tears of profound relief welled up in her eyes, and she immediately turned to hit the emergency call button for the on-duty doctor. But I squeezed her hand again, much harder this time. I needed her to understand the absolute gravity of my dangerous situation. I blinked twice for no, and then stared deep into her eyes with all the desperate pleading a helpless mother could muster. Sarah paused her hand, hovering over the plastic button. I spent the next grueling hour painfully establishing a blinking system to communicate. I spelled out my plea letter by letter. I begged her to keep my awakening a complete secret from my family. I explained that my life and my financial legacy were in terrible danger. Sarah, bless her incredibly kind heart, understood the desperate terror of a vulnerable older woman. She agreed to help me fight back. In the dead of night, while the rest of the hospital slept, Sarah slipped her personal cell phone into my trembling hands. My fingers felt like thick rubber, and my vision was still a little blurry from the medication, but the intense fire of righteous anger fueled my movements. I painfully dialed the private home number of my longtime attorney and dearest trusted friend, Mr. Arthur Sterling. Arthur had known my late husband, and he knew exactly how hard I had worked to build my life from nothing. When he answered, his voice thick with sleep, I forced my damaged vocal cords to produce a raspy, broken whisper. I told him I was awake. I told him I was in danger, and I told him to get to my hospital room immediately before the morning staff arrived. I knew Arthur would never fail me. Arthur arrived just before sunrise, slipping past the busy nurses' station with the quiet, unquestionable authority only an old Southern lawyer possesses. He wore a wrinkled brown trench coat over his pajamas, carrying his heavy leather briefcase like a protective shield. When he walked into my room and saw me sitting up slightly, fighting through the extreme physical weakness to stay alert, the hardened lawyer broke down and cried genuine tears. But we simply did not have time for tears or sentimentality. I rasped out every single horrifying detail of my children's deep betrayal. I told him about Chloe's disgusting plan to bulldoze my beautiful historic home for overpriced luxury condos. I told him about Alicia's cold-blooded scheme to throw my disabled sister out onto the street the moment I stopped breathing. Arthur's sadness instantly hardened into a fierce, highly protective rage. He pulled a thick pad of yellow legal paper from his briefcase, clicked his gold pen, and told me we were going to make them pay dearly for every single ounce of their toxic greed. We worked rapidly to construct an absolutely airtight legal counterattack. First, I officially and immediately revoked my previous will and entirely stripped Kevin and Alicia of their medical power of attorney. I formally appointed Arthur as my sole proxy, giving him total control over my medical decisions. Then we moved on to protect my sanctuary. I legally placed the entire property, including the main house and the guest house, into a strict historical preservation trust. This ingenious legal maneuver meant the land could never be sold to developers, and the physical structure could absolutely never be altered or destroyed by anyone. Chloe's filthy, wealthy developer friends were now permanently blocked from ever touching my property. To ensure my vulnerable sister was deeply protected, I wrote an ironclad lifetime tenancy clause into the trust guaranteeing she could live peacefully in that guest house, completely rent-free for the rest of her natural days. Alicia would never be able to send the local sheriff to her door. Next, we dealt with the money I had saved over a lifetime of double shifts. I drained every single penny from the joint bank accounts my children knew about and transferred the funds into a brand new, highly secure trust account under Arthur's exclusive management. I entirely changed the beneficiaries on all my life insurance policies, ensuring Kevin and Alicia would not receive a single dime when I passed away. We spent 3 intense hours drafting, signing, and legally notarizing the heavy stack of documents. Arthur brought in a trusted senior physician who secretly evaluated me, officially declaring me entirely of sound mind and fully capable of executing these binding legal changes. By the time the morning sun peeked through the hospital blinds, my legacy was heavily armored. I had successfully stripped my greedy children of their future inheritance, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming. For the next 2 days, I played the most difficult and agonizing role of my entire life. Whenever visiting hours began, I forced my body to go entirely limp. I relaxed my facial muscles, closed my eyes completely, and regulated my breathing to perfectly mimic a deep, unresponsive coma. It took an incredible amount of mental discipline to play possum. While the exact people I gave birth to stood over my bed and openly plotted my demise. Kevin, Alicia, and Chloe visited like clockwork, bringing their fake sympathy for the nurses and their toxic, unyielding greed for me. They would stand right next to my pillow, assuming I was nothing more than a mindless vegetable, incapable of any conscious thought. But hidden carefully beneath the thick hospital blankets, my hand was tightly gripping the smartphone Sarah had lent me. I had set the phone to record audio perfectly. I lay completely still as they had a brazen, incredibly disgusting conversation about my bank safe deposit box. Kevin nervously mentioned that they needed the cash inside the box to pay off a massive personal debt before the estate went into probate. Alicia coldly suggested that since I was going to die anyway, they should just practice forging my signature on the bank authorization forms right now to save time. Chloe enthusiastically agreed, laughing loudly as she told them how easy it would be to bribe a shady notary she knew to illegally backdate the paperwork. They spent 20 full minutes standing over their dying mother, explicitly discussing how to commit felony fraud to steal the absolute last of my hidden valuables. They rehearsed the lies they were going to tell the bank manager, laughing about how perfectly they were going to pull off the heist. I recorded every single word of their criminal conspiracy. The audio was crystal clear, capturing the sheer malice in their voices. Every time they insulted my intelligence or bragged about stealing my life savings, they were hammering another solid nail into their own coffins. The utter audacity of their plan made my blood boil, but I maintained my completely blank expression. I let them build their arrogant castle of lies, knowing I was holding the exact match that would burn it straight to the ground. With the ironclad trust successfully established and the incriminating audio securely saved, it was finally time to spring the trap. I coordinated the final act of this painful play with Arthur and my trusted doctor. I asked the doctor to call Kevin and Alicia with a very specific, highly urgent message. He was instructed to tell them that I had experienced a miraculous, but extremely brief, window of lucidity. He told them my vitals were dropping rapidly, and that this would likely be their one and only chance to say a final goodbye, before I slipped away forever. I knew exactly how my greedy children would interpret that message. They would not hear a loving mother fighting for her life. They would hear a golden opportunity to get my legitimate signature on their fraudulent documents before my heart completely stopped beating. Less than an hour later, I heard the rapid, frantic footsteps of my family rushing down the hospital corridor. I sat propped up in my hospital bed, my eyes half closed, perfectly playing the part of a weak and fading old woman clinging to her final breaths. The heavy door burst open. Kevin, Alicia, and Chloe rushed into the room, their faces plastered with incredibly convincing fake tears. Kevin dramatically fell to his knees beside my bed, grabbing my hand and crying loudly about how much he truly loved me. Alicia stood on my other side, weeping heavily as she stroked my hair, and told me she would always cherish our beautiful memories. But my eyes were sharp enough to catch the disgusting truth. Tucked discreetly under Kevin's arm was a thick manila folder holding the property transfer deeds and the bank authorization forms they desperately wanted me to sign. They were putting on a spectacular grieving family performance for the nurses standing in the hallway, but their eyes were darting nervously toward the paperwork. They truly thought they were about to secure their millions from a dying woman too weak and confused to read the fine print. They thought they had entirely won the game. They had absolutely no idea that the helpless mother they were trying to rob had already locked the doors, loaded the legal evidence, and was waiting patiently to execute the most devastating reality check of their miserable, selfish lives. I let them put on their disgusting performance for a full 2 minutes. I listened to Kevin sob fake tears and felt Alicia stroke my hair with her treacherous hands. I felt the heat of their fake affection and knew it was nothing but a calculated lie. Then, without a single warning, I opened my eyes wide. I pushed myself up from the hospital pillows, my posture entirely rigid, my expression sharp and cold as solid ice. The fake dramatic sobbing stopped instantly. The heavy silence that fell over the hospital room was absolute. Kevin stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair, dropping his manila folder full of fraudulent documents onto the sterile floor. Alicia gasped loudly, her hand freezing in midair, her eyes wide with sheer terror as she stared at the mother she thought was already a corpse. I did not say a word to them at first. Instead, I reached under my blanket, pulled out the smartphone and pressed play. The crystal-clear audio of their sick, greedy plotting filled the quiet room. My children stood entirely paralyzed as they listened to their own voices, loudly discussing how to forge my signature on bank authorization forms and how easily they could bribe a shady notary. I watched the color completely drain from Kevin's face. His jaw went entirely slack, his arrogant demeanor dissolving into pure fear. Alicia began to shake violently, stepping back from the bed as if I had suddenly caught fire. The sheer panic in their eyes was the exact justice I had prayed for in the dark. But Chloe, always the arrogant and entitled one, tried to spin a desperate web of lies. She stepped forward, forcing a nervous laugh, and desperately tried to gaslight me. She told me I was entirely confused by the heavy hospital medication, that I had misunderstood a completely innocent conversation about protecting my assets for the future. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I simply locked my eyes onto hers and spoke with an icy, uncompromising authority that stopped her dead in her tracks. I told Chloe to shut her lying mouth immediately. I told her I was awake when she laughed about bulldozing my historic home, and I was awake when she called my decades of hard work tacky and pathetic. I stared directly at my son and my daughter, telling them I heard every single vicious, calculated word they said about carving up my life savings and throwing my disabled sister out onto the street. I told them their loving mother died in this bed 3 days ago, and the woman looking at them now was simply the executor of her ruined estate. The look of profound horror on their faces was a masterpiece of absolute crushing defeat. Before they could even attempt to form another pathetic excuse, the hospital door swung open again. Mr. Sterling walked in looking like a stern executioner carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He walked straight to Kevin and Alicia and handed them a thick stack of official legal documents. I watched their eyes scan the front pages in pure disbelief. They were formal, immediate eviction notices for the properties they thought they owned, along with a certified letter permanently and completely disinheriting them from my entire estate. I told them my home was now permanently locked in a strict historical preservation trust, and they would never see a single dime of my hard-earned money. Chloe's face turned ghost white as she realized her massive luxury condo deal had just gone entirely up in smoke. She had already taken heavy financial advances from her greedy developer friends, and now she was deeply in debt and completely humiliated. Arthur then delivered the final devastating blow. He pointed a stern finger at the fraudulent bank forms scattered on the hospital floor. He calmly informed them that because they had explicitly conspired to forge legal documents and steal from a safe deposit box, he had already forwarded the entire audio recording to the district attorney. He promised them that if they ever came near me, my home, or my disabled sister ever again, he would immediately press felony criminal charges and ensure they spent years in a federal prison. My children were completely broken. They walked out of my hospital room with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the heavy, terrifying realization that their monstrous greed had cost them absolutely everything. As the heavy door clicked shut behind them, a profound sense of peace finally washed over me. But my legacy was not just about punishing the wicked. It was about rewarding the righteous. I looked toward the doorway as my beautiful granddaughter Jada walked into the room. She was Alicia's estranged daughter, the brilliant young woman. My cruel daughter had heartlessly kicked out of the house at 18. For years, I had been secretly funding Jada's college education, watching her work incredibly hard to build a life of deep integrity and strong purpose. When she ran to my bed and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, her tears were entirely real. Her love was genuine and pure. I whispered to her that everything I had built, the beautiful historic home, the hidden trust accounts, the entire legacy of my long life, now belonged exclusively to her. I had legally named Jada as my sole heir. The empire I sacrificed my youth to build was finally safe. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply for the first time in days, knowing my life's work was securely placed in the warm, capable hands of someone who truly understood the exact meaning of real love and hard work. There is a very specific and unique kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing you have completely outgrown the children you gave birth to. We spend our entire lives pouring our absolute best into them, hoping that our deep sacrifices will build a solid foundation of gratitude and love. But the hard truth I had to learn in that hospital bed is that you cannot buy loyalty, and you certainly cannot force entitlement out of a greedy heart. Sometimes the absolute most difficult choice a mother must make is choosing her own peace over the toxic illusion of family harmony. Your legacy is your own. The hard work, the long hours, and the sanctuary you built belong entirely to you, not to the selfish demands of relatives waiting for you to fall. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, make you feel like your life is just a stepping stone for their greed. If you have ever had to stand up for yourself against the exact people you thought loved you the most, you know exactly how heavy this crown is to wear. It is a lonely battle, but it is an absolutely necessary one. You are so much stronger than the betrayals you have survived, and your peace is always worth protecting at all costs. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story to help empower another strong woman today. We need to remind each other that our voices and our boundaries still matter. I would absolutely love to connect with you down below. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Your stories and your strength keep me going.